I'm a absolutely passionate believer in campaigns that recognise talented women across the world and across our industry. I think it's all too easy um, to be really modest as women and to overlook or not prioritise celebrating our fantastic achievements across the tech industry. The reason these sorts of campaigns massively benefit us as companies and individuals is firstly in terms of attracting female talent into our companies, women seeing these sorts of celebratory stories, seeing some of the fantastic achievements of this year's finalists, and really being able to project in their minds their own future success in the IT industry through those celebratory stories. So I think it's vitally important for us. I also think it's super important in terms of, being able to share these stories with one another, to have new innovation sources and ideas, and for us to share what's best practice, what works well in a forum that we wouldn't ordinarily do that. So that's an interesting story. I actually joined the IT industry pretty much straight out of school. I didn't go to further education, and actually, I joined the IT industry to use skills that I developed actually as a really young child. I started coding at about 5 years old with my dad, who was an engineer and who worked in originally the electronics, but then later the IT industry, and it was just a bit of a hobby. So I used those skills in a role whilst I effectively worked out what I wanted to do for my more permanent career. And here I am 25 plus years later, having worked my way up through an industry that I've never looked back on, has kept me absolutely engaged, entertained, growing and developing in all sorts of new directions. And I think that just demonstrates what an exciting industry we work within. I think some years ago, we always used to talk about the fact that, put simply, more men took up STEM subjects to study than perhaps women did. But I think that's now relatively an old fashioned view. Whilst it still may be true, I think there are other things for us to really focus on, as well as just helping women to study STEM subjects. I think like attracts like. So where we have more women in senior roles, in leadership roles, or in very technical roles in the IT industry, more women will come. They will recognise that that's perfectly normal for that company, and it definitely helps in terms with attracting more women. We need to work for companies that look externally like the sort of company we can identify with, and I think that's a really, really important factor. I also think, actually, in terms of how we redress that, if you will, I think we need to do more of this sort of stuff. We need to be more public about the women in our companies, the women who work in our IT businesses, right across the industry, because I think senior women and women working in deeply technical roles in the industry have an absolute care of duty to be really vocal about it, because that, as you know, will inspire women who are just starting out on their own career journey to come join us. Actually, I think the biggest surprise for me is probably around what I saw as failures at the time. I think the biggest eureka moment for me was understanding that actually it's nearly always the less positive experiences, projects, interactions we have that have shaped me as an individual the most. And actually, that they are really big learning points, and something that we can be proud of and take away into the next piece of work we do. And, looking for those findings and factoring them into my decision making. I think as women, um, we can often be quite reflective. And I think sometimes our fear of what we perceive as failure moments, like the ones I just talked about briefly, can hold us back. If we're frightened of failing, we're probably not going to be so bold. So for me, in my career journey, learning to notice those moments, learning to take the best from them, and kind of de-fearing them to some degree, is probably the biggest positive lesson in my career for me. It's allowed me to be more courageous in my decision making, more bold, and inevitably to, accelerate progress and innovation. And that's really, really important in what we do right across the IT industry. Actually, they'd be really, really simple. Number one, and really powerfully for me, would be please always be authentically you. As women, I think sometimes we are terrible self critiques and we look at those around us and think, I should be more like them. I should aspire to act differently, particularly people we admire. And actually, that stops us being authentic. That inhibits diversity, in my view. Um, the industry has moved to a point where that diversity of thinking is exactly what companies are looking for. So when we're not authentically us, we're kind of, blocking that to some degree. Number two, I think, would be very much around our inner dialogue, and I spoke about it briefly then. Don't let that hold you back when you're considering roles. I think it's something we all do. We look at that job description and we look at the items in it and say, well, I don't have that experience, or perhaps that's not my strongest skill, rather than looking at the massive value we could bring to a role. So let's focus on the parts of that job description we know are absolutely tailor-made for us, that we could really excel at, and not dwell so much as we can do on the points where we perhaps have less experience or it's not our strongest suit. And then finally, just like in the Women in Tech Excellence Awards 2021, find a network. Find a network of supportive people in your industry, in your company, in your peer group, and really interact and contribute to that network heavily, and pay it forward. And by that, I mean you only get as much out of a network of support as you put into it, whether that be some of the women's networks, women in business networks, whether it be campaigns such as this one, or whether it be a more simple mentoring or coaching relationship, whether you're a mentee or a mentor. What we take from those experiences, I think, take us right through our careers. So find that support network wherever it is and really actively engage with it, not passively, but really engage with it. And I promise you, you will absolutely reap what you sow in that respect. You'll get a huge bow wave of support back and new ideas and thoughts. And you'll learn you're not alone in some of the concerns you have. You'll learn that other people feel that way too. And I think those sorts of peer networks are incredibly, incredibly supportive.